The NFL draft is 2 weeks away, and one thing I'm pondering as far as the Panthers go is, will they take a flyer on a running back on day 3? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays right here on the show, I'm answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions either at me or DM me. But of course, follow me first on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for tomorrow's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag. By the way, planning on doing the podcast earlier as I record the day before. So get those questions into me early Thursday morning, and I'll record the show then. Got a flight to Fort Worth to catch. So please get those questions into me as soon as you can. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. In 2 weeks' time from today, the 2024 NFL Draft will be officially underway in Detroit, Michigan. The Carolina Panthers, though, are not slated to pick until Friday night at pick 33, the first pick in the second round. But there's still a possibility that Carolina moves up into the first round to take a player they just cannot live without. But I'm wondering on today's show whether the Panthers are going to decide that on day 3, late in the Saturday afternoon, do they want to take a running back and finder back of the future? Looking at the running back outlook right now for the Carolina Panthers, Chuba Hubbard, he is entering into the final year of his rookie deal. Last year, he started off the season as a number 2 back, which he's been since he started off his career here in Carolina, having to fill in for Christian McCaffrey when he went down with an injury, filling in also with when McCaffrey got traded away, or he was a tandem back with Deontay Foreman, but really Foreman was a lead guy for the Panthers in that 2022 season. Then last year, Miles Sanders got up to a bad start, had a groin injury as well. That gave Chuba an opportunity to take over as the lead back. And entering into the draft right now, Chuba Hubbard is RB1 here in Carolina, and I'm excited for the opportunity that he has. Do I think that Chuba Hubbard is the best back in the league? No. The Carolina Panthers don't need necessarily have the best back in the league. They did in Christian McCaffrey, and that did not necessarily lead to wins. Had he been healthy, maybe that would have helped the Panthers. I'm not so sure as far as how the quarterback play was not great. The offensive line play was not great as well. There's other areas of the team that just weren't up to standard to have a successful team in the NFL. But I do think that Chuba Hubbard this season in Carolina can have a great season behind this new built offensive line of Ike Ekwonu back at left tackle, bringing in Damian Lewis at left guard, Robert Hunt at right guard, Taylor Moton's back there at right tackle. And for right now, Austin Corbett slated to be the starting center with that trio, especially in the interior. Just look at the left side with Lewis and then with Ike. This team should be able to run the football. And Dave Canales, new head coach here in Carolina, has talked about being stubborn when it comes to running the football, which means Chuba Hubbard's going to get an opportunity to potentially run for 1,000 yards. And is that as impressive as it used to be back during the 16-game schedule? Now that it's a 17-game schedule, maybe not. Still, it's one extra game. Yes, another opportunity. I still look at it as being something that is phenomenal for a player to do. Now, if you get to 1,200 yards, maybe that looks like a little better with the added game to the season. But staying healthy, especially at the running back position where we see these guys get beat up all the time, that's led to the devaluation of the position. I'm certainly someone who sat here and has devalued running back, saying federal minimum wage is all I want to pay my running backs. I don't want to pay a running back $16 million per year like the Panthers were paying McCaffrey, even though I understood that he was different and liked it a lot more than the Panthers giving Miles Sanders a deal last year. And speaking of Miles Sanders, he's still here in Carolina, at least for now. We'll see what happens in 2 weeks and whether the Panthers do indeed take a running back. If they do, I would think that's probably the end for Miles Sanders here in Carolina. They could not cut him pre-June 1. They would have lost $2.275 million against the salary cap. He did get a $2 million roster bonus that was due to him on the third day of the new league year back in middle of March last month. That's something that the Panthers probably didn't want to do, but they felt like they had to do just based off of they can't lose cap space, weren't quite sure what their plan was going to be with a couple of players that they wanted to bring in. And we found out getting Clowney later on in the process, some other starters, that probably impacted them not wanting to get rid of Miles Sanders. And maybe Dave Canales' ethos of being stubborn when it comes to running the football is a big reason why he still has Miles Sanders here. He's spoken about Chuba Hubbard being the number one running back, and they decided to see what Miles does. Now it's going to come down to what Dan Morgan wants to do as the general manager here and looking at the contract structure. And if Brett Tillis feels like cap-wise it's smart for the Panthers to part ways with him post-June 1 and looking at his deal post-June 1 if you were to be cut, and I don't think the Panthers can trade Miles Sanders away at this point in time. He would leave them a 7.49 dead cap hit at $7.49 million, by the way. Then they would only save $200,000 as far as the cap goes. So at this point, it just makes sense to me. You might as well just keep him around. If you didn't get rid of him and take the cap hit before, you're really not saving that much money, and then you're still going to have him eating up $7.4 million of your cap anyways if he's not on the roster. Looking at just at the running back depth right now, if they don't take a running back, it's Chuba, it's Miles, it's Raheem Blackshear, who did not get that many opportunities, but can be that third round change of pace, or that third down rather change of pace back. And I do like the kind of speed that he provides, and the Panthers certainly need speed offensively. He's a good kick returner, which is now something that's important after the rule changes that happened a couple of weeks ago at the NFL owners meetings down in Orlando, Florida. So looking at Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard, both of them are back this year. This could be the last year for Chuba just based off of his contract. We'll have to see what he does and whether the Panthers want to sign him to a new deal. I think either way, the Panthers either take a running back this year or next year, and probably preferably next year. Don't take a guy now, have him sit back there, not really get a lot of carries, especially if they end up keeping Miles Sanders around, which I don't think they would. I still feel like Chuba would be the lead horse, and then that guy could step up in the following season and then be the guy, and that's going to save some wear and tear on his body. But these guys coming out of college are like 22, 23, 24 because of all the COVID years, and they've sat around and transferred a lot. So they're older players. They have some miles on them. I would prefer to take a running back next year and then start the clock right then and there for 4 seasons, opposed to taking one this year. But I can understand why the Panthers may feel like getting later in the day on Saturday in a couple weeks. Why not take a flyer on a running back? So should the Carolina Panthers take a flyer on a running back? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers, and that could be you, North Carolinians, get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Guaranteed money. That's $150. Win or lose. Does not matter. Just place a bet, and maybe you win some money. Maybe you lose some money. Doesn't matter. $150 in bonus bets. Free money, y'all, that you can bet using FanDuel. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Seriously, FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. In a couple weeks, when day 3 of the NFL draft is going on in Detroit, we get into round 4, round 5, round 6, and round 7. The Panthers have pick 101 in the 4th round. By the way, they have picks 141 and 142 in the 5th round. No pick in the 6th round. That was traded away to Pittsburgh to get Deontay Johnson here to Carolina to help out Bryce Young. And they picked up the 240th pick in the draft, which is in the 7th round from Pittsburgh, in that Deontay Johnson 6th round, the 7th round trade the Panthers made last month. If they get to pick 101, 141, 142, and 240, and they look at their board and see best player available is a running back, do the Panthers take a flyer on that player? Should they take a flyer on a running back late into day 3 of the NFL draft. I will say this. Under no circumstance do I think that with pick 101 to start off day 3, should they be taking a running back? I still feel like at that point in time, the Panthers are probably looking at 33. We discussed this ad nauseum over the last couple of weeks. They probably have taken either a wide receiver or an edge. Maybe they take an offensive lineman, in particular a center, which we talked about early on this weekend with Trevor Sikkema and with Jordan Reed, the guests that we've had on the last 2 weeks here on the show, respective NFL analysts. So maybe they do that. They could take a corner potentially at 39, or maybe they wait until 65 to do that. Maybe linebackers. We talked about Peyton Wilson on last night's show. I don't know. For me, I just don't think you take a running back with any of those picks. You don't do it in night 2. It just does not make a lot of sense for a team that is going to have Chuba Hubbard as their starting running back this year. And at this point in time, they have Miles Sanders on the roster. Financially, doesn't do them much good to get rid of him post June 1. Why not have him come back here, be a body who has shown he can be a Pro Bowler, who's shown that he can play at a high level in the NFL. And after last year, where quite honestly didn't get a lot of carries, was pretty banged up, maybe he's going to be fresher this season, or it's just he's getting old. And because he was injured last year was due to the fact that he's getting old. He has the wear and tear on his body, which comes with playing the running back position at a high level at Penn State, then for the Eagles for those couple of seasons. And then last year in Carolina, just never really got off the ground. And when he got an opportunity, did not look great. And Chuba Hubbard took over as that number 1 guy. We'll see what the Panthers, in particular Dave Canales, decides to do with those 2 running backs once we get to that point in time. If we do, in fact, get to the point in time where it is Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders still as a top 2 backs here in Carolina. Or maybe, like we're discussing right now, they decide, let's take a young running back. Let's bring him in. Let's get rid of Miles Sanders, and let's start to groom this guy for the next 3 seasons after 2024 to be the lead back in Carolina. That's cool. Just don't do it with 101. That could be a tight end. It could still be a linebacker. It could be any other position that the Panthers feel like is valuable at that point in time. I just don't think right there you're getting running back. And that's, we talk about all the time looking at the draft. You want to have picks in the top 100. How many picks you have in the top 100, you can really control the draft. The Panthers, they right now have 2 picks in top 40, which is good considering they don't have a first round pick. The fact they have 33 and 39, they have 65. So you have only 3 picks in the top 100. But like when we talk about pick 33, it's not technically, but it's basically a first round pick. You're going to get a first round talent with that pick. When you look at pick 101, while it's not technically a 3rd round pick and it's going to be on day 3, you should be able to get a day 2 type of talent with that pick at 101. And I just don't think, looking at the modern game, that a running back is what the Panthers should be valuing at pick 101. Maybe they do. Maybe that's what they want to do. I don't know. Just to me, I don't think that that's the Panthers should be valuing there at 101. Now, later on in the 5th round, back-to-back picks, one at 141, which they got into Brian Burns trade with the Giants, and then Tennessee's 5th round pick, 142, which they got in the Dennis Daly trade a couple years ago. That's when we can start having the conversation. And still at that point in time, I'm not quite so sure that's what we want to see. So let's just say this. 33, say they take a wide receiver. 39, let's say they take a center. Then we get to 65, they take an edge rusher, and then you get to 101, they take a linebacker or a tight end. 141 and 142, you're going to be able to get whoever you want. I don't even know if the salaries are different. I imagine the weight scale has got to be a little bit different just between those 2 picks. At that point in time, does it matter if you take a running back at 141, or you take a running back at 142, or you take tight end or whatever position, corner potentially with either one of those picks? I'm just looking at the list of needs as we discussed here on the show, and I don't even remember last week when we talked about the needs. I know we talked primary needs, which was edge, it was center, it was wide receiver. I think it was actually wide receiver, corner, and edge. And since then, I have put center ahead of corner, which center last week, to me, in my mind, as we continue to go through this draft process, was more of a secondary need. Just looking at Austin Corbett coming in to be the starter, because maybe the Panthers actually look at that as a bigger need, knowing that Austin Corbett has not played center in the NFL, at least not an actual NFL game, and he could get somebody potentially like Mel Kiper Jr. put in his draft that he recently put out there on Wednesday, having Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon, who is a first-round talent who potentially could be around in the second round for the Panthers to take. And if he's there, or Zach Frazier's there, of course, Graham Barton out of Duke, I'm going to be pretty hard-pressed for the Panthers to pass on one of those guys, especially knowing that that is a position of need. But it comes down to what their board looks like and who they think is the best player, and also what are some of the other things they're trying to achieve in this draft. You can look at it: wide receiver, bigger need than running back. Certainly tight end's a bigger need. Edge, center, as we talked about. Linebacker, same kind of need as far as running back goes. As you're going to look at Shaq Thompson. He's probably gone from Carolina after this year, going to be a unrestricted free agent next year. Josie Jewell probably sticking around for at least one more season after 2024, unless he's just a complete disaster this fall. And that's kind of similar to where Chuba Hubbard, he's going to be a free agent next year. Miles Sanders, likely going to be a free agent. Just looking at his contract here quickly on overthecap.com, the Panthers would take on $2.95 million of dead cap money next year if they cut him pre-June 1, and then they would save $5.2 million by letting him go. Now, if they did it post-June 1, they would be able to save more money, 6.7, and it'd be 1.4 million, as that'll be split over the across 2 seasons. They could do that if they wanted to with Miles Sanders, but I don't expect Miles Sanders to be back here for a 2025 season unless he just has a complete turnaround in Carolina this season. And if he can take back the number one role and really help this team establish the run, we'll see how that works out. But short to say, the Panthers running back spot is not really a big need for them right now. The place I would be willing to take a flyer is in the 7th round, pick 240. Because at that point in time, why the hell not? If you've gotten your edge, you've gotten your wide receiver, you got a center who can be here for the next hopeful decade in Carolina. If you've got a tight end maybe, and you've gotten a corner, why not go out there and get a running back in the 7th round? Because you look at the other positions, because at that point in time, that guy's coming in, is trying to make the roster based off of special teams. He's not coming in to be a marquee player. And when I look at the best team in the NFL, the Kansas City Chiefs, what round did they take their starting running back in? The 7th round. Isaiah Pacheco out of Rutgers was a 7th round pick. I understand completely the Chiefs situation is completely different to the Carolina Panthers, considering they have Pat Mahomes, Andy Reid's their head coach, and the way that they constructed that defense and that overall roster. Oh, by the way, Brant Tillis comes from Kansas City and helped construct that roster working under general manager Brett Veach there in KC. So he's seen the value of taking a running back in the final round of the draft. Maybe he's going to be in Dan Morgan's ear and tell him, so we did in Kansas City. I understand things have been different, but the Panthers are looking at Bryce Young and thinking that maybe he can play at a Mahomes level down the road. That's what every team who's taking a quarterback in the 1st round, especially number 1 overall, and giving up what the Panthers gave up to get Bryce Young, that's what they're thinking. They're thinking that they have a generational talent, a difference maker who's going to finally bring them a Super Bowl. And what David Tepper said last year wasn't just a Super Bowl. He was talking about Super Bowls, plural, multiple Lombardi trophies hanging up there on Mint Street. That's what he was talking about with Bryce Young. So if they still feel that way, and you have someone who comes from a championship culture that he helped build in KC, and they took a running back in the 7th round, you can't ignore that possibility happening for the Panthers in a couple weeks' times up in Detroit. So if they're going to take a flyer, I damn sure don't want to see it at 101, 141, 142, not necessarily all that interested either, but 240 in the 7th round, typically where I just don't really care who they take. Yeah. Why not? Go ahead, take a flyer and see if that guy can end up being someone who can really help you down the road, in particular in 2025, possibly as your lead back, if that's the direction you want to go in if you're Carolina. So we talked about potentially taking a flyer on a guy in the 7th round who are players that would be around in the 5th at 141 and 142, and who would be around in the 7th round potentially for the Carolina Panthers. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because of eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So we've discussed the principle of the Carolina Panthers potentially taking a flyer on a running back in day 3 of the draft. But really, what matters is who's the player? Who's the player that you're looking at on the board and saying, we need that man to be a Carolina Panther? Like, that is a dog. That is someone that we need to be toting the rock here for at least the next 4 years. And for me, yes, the next 4 years, you use them, you abuse them, you lose them. That's how it works when it comes to running backs in the NFL, unless there's that just small few like McCaffrey that you would want to keep around. But you got to get the quarterback situation right, which the Panthers did not, and that's why McCaffrey is in San Francisco and not here in Carolina. But let's talk about happy things potentially. Dane Brugler, who I'm hoping to have on the show here before draft time. I texted him a couple weeks ago and been like, hey, I need to get you on the show again. And he said, I'm working on something. Get back to me a couple weeks. And a couple weeks is now, so I should send him a text and be like, hey, Dane, remember what you said a couple weeks ago? Well, the thing he was working on was his annual The Beast rankings, a complete breakdown of all of the draft eligible players in each draft. So this year, 2024 NFL draft. Now, what you need to do, though, is subscribe to The Athletic, or if you're subscribed to the New York Times, which is now owning The Athletic, you may have an opportunity as well to go out there and to subscribe to get this information. I'm going to provide you a couple of guys when looking at Dane's The Beast rankings who would be there, who interests me for the Carolina Panthers. First one is Rashawn Ali out of Marshall. Dane Brugler gives him a 5th round grade. So we're looking at pick 141 and 142, both from the Giants and Titans in past trades here to Carolina, where they could take a guy like Rashawn Ali. He has had 1,000-yard rushing seasons twice at Marshall. That has been a program that has historically always had a solid following college football wise. And I think they've done a pretty good job in the Sun Belt, which has been a pretty tough league nowadays, the way that things are restructured there with realignment and some of the teams coming in like James Madison, what they've done. We know about App State every single year, and Marshall has been a team that has gone up to Notre Dame and won not too far removed from that a couple of years ago when they did that. He's a player I'd be interested in potentially. One guy who I really loved watching him play and really his story this past season, Mizzou, Cody Schrader. He came from Division II Truman State there in Missouri, ran for 2,000 yards a couple seasons ago, decides to transfer up to the SEC. Big jump to go from a program in D2 up to the SEC in Mizzou. And I know if you follow college football, you don't really look at Mizzou as being an SEC school. It's still weird that that's the case, but they are. They've been in the SEC for over a decade now, and they had a hell of a season last year in large part because Cody Schrader is a dog. Like, that's what we're talking about here in Carolina. That's what Dan Morgan wants to get. And we saw that out of a dude who's only 5'8", his first year in the SEC, just about 800 yards rushing. Then last year led the SEC. The Southeastern Conference, the best conference in college football in rushing, with 1,600 yards. We're going to talk about a lot of guys out there who have played at Georgia or at Florida and all these other schools, Bama, who should be these top backs. But the best back in the SEC last year was a dude who was playing Division II football 2 years prior. And now he has a 5th to 6th round grade. The Panthers don't have a pick in the 6th round. If they're going to take Schrader, it looks like it needs to be in the 5th round. If they take him, it's going to be hard for me to hate that pick. I do wonder if he's going to be able to translate to the NFL level. It's different going from D2 to the SEC, then to the NFL, certainly. But he's shown that he can be someone who can help you. I don't look at him as being a lead back. He would have to be a rotational guy. And looking at this season, that's what the Panthers would do. And then they would probably have to get someone else. Certainly would have to get somebody else next season. I do like Cody Schrader if they're going to take a flyer. I would rather it be in the 7th round, but he's not going to be there. That's a guy that they could probably take at 141, 142. Really wouldn't hate it. Dylan Johnson as well. Enjoyed watching him play this past season at Washington under Kalen DeBoer, Michael Penix Jr. Like, that offense was just sick to watch him. As I mentioned, Penix Jr., you look at Roma Dunze is going to be a top 10 pick potentially. Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk. That offense was outstanding this past year. And Dylan Johnson was a guy who was not even supposed to be a big part of it. Washington lost their starting running back before the season even started. It was in training camp back in August when they lost their starting running back. And then it's like, okay, Dylan Johnson, you're up. Had never heard of Dylan Johnson, to be quite honest with you, until I saw him this past year, and he was awesome against Oregon in the first game up there in Seattle, had a hell of a game against USC, where, yes, USC's defense was terrible this past year, but he still made him pay all night long there at the Coliseum. Was great again in the second Oregon game. Was really banged up in the playoff, and that hurt Washington, especially in the national championship game, which I don't really think was going to matter. Michigan was going to steamroll them regardless. He's a player who's older, but didn't get that many carries back in college until this past season. So we've seen that he can go through a 15-game schedule. That's what it's required if you're going to play in a national championship game. I think it's going to be now 16 games with the expanded playoff potentially for some teams that go to the national championship in college football. He has shown you he can handle the wear and tear of a physical season. And the Pac-12 was a hell of a league this past year. RIP, the football side of it. Still got the baseball side of it and some other sports here in the spring for the next couple of weeks, but it's over and done with come July 1st. Dylan Johnson, though, he has a 6th and 7th round grade. He could be there at 240. I like him. Jawar Jordan, he was really good for Louisville, another team that had 10-win season that kind of came out of nowhere. Jeff Brom taking over as a head coach there, native son, and he got that offense rolling, and Jawar Jordan was really good for them. He's someone to look at. Jace McClellan, I did a live stream on Bleacher Report a couple weeks ago doing a mock draft, and I had someone who's saying Jace McClellan. And that goes back to the obsession fans have over, you got to give Bryce someone he played with at Alabama, as if he played on the 2019 LSU team that we're talking about. The guys he played with are Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. When it comes to Joe Burrow getting Jamar Chase, totally makes sense. When it comes to getting Jace McClellan, who has a 7th round grade to a preferred undrafted free agent grade, maybe not necessarily what you need, but he does have some home run speed. He was an inconsistent player at Alabama. They haven't had really a good running back the last couple. They had Jahmyr Gibbs, who they had to transfer in from Georgia Tech. They haven't had a good running back that Saban recruited in a couple years' time now. Now, Jace, he can catch the ball in the backfield. I like that about him. Again, home run speed, pretty decent size. I don't know how good of an NFL back he will be. But again, we're talking about taking a flyer. We're not necessarily saying, yeah, you're going to build your team based off of the 7th round running back that you take. Maybe you do. Possibly Ali or Cody Schrader, Dylan Johnson, Jawar Jordan, Jace McClellan, or any other guys available. Surprise. And they turn out to be that dude. I don't know if I'm going to bet on that, but I like some of these guys potentially for the Carolina Panthers there late in the 7th round, or just late period in day 3 if they want to take somebody potentially there at a running back spot as a flyer. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, y'all, my name is Julian Council. I'm your host. As always, subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where I'll be back with you again on Friday for the weekly Friday mailbag. And that, of course, is tomorrow. And get those questions into me quickly. Flying out to Fort Worth in the afternoon. Would rather not take my stuff out there to record. So want to record Thursday morning. Get me some questions in. I already have people who've gotten questions in now. So as soon as you hear this or watch this, if you're watching on YouTube tonight before Thursday, give me the questions in by adding me, DMing me on Twitter at Julian Council, and I will probably answer your question on tomorrow's show. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always, and forever keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all on Friday.